At 2:47 in the morning, a poor waitress opened the door to a small restaurant, and a soaked little boy walked in alone. His clothes were expensive. His shoes cost more than her monthly rent. His hands were shaking. His eyes looked older than his face. He walked straight to her, held out his freezing fingers, and asked one simple question. "Miss, can you walk me home?" She didn't know his name. She didn't know where his parents were. She didn't know that one small act of kindness would pull her into the life of one of the richest and most dangerous families in New York. And before the sun came up, she would be thrown to the ground, with a gun pointed at her chest. If stories about love, sacrifice, and the power of kindness touch your heart, take a moment to subscribe. There's a lot more waiting ahead. It was a cold, rainy night in Flushing, Queens. Jessie Morgan was 27 years old, tired to the bone, and counting the minutes until she could go home and sleep. She worked the night shift at a small restaurant called Golden Dragon. It wasn't fancy. Neon lights flickered. The floor always smelled a little like soy sauce and bleach. But the job paid the rent, and right now, that was enough. At 2:47 a.m., she finished wiping the last table and reached for the front door to lock it. That's when the bell chimed. She froze. No one came in at that hour. When she turned, she saw a little boy standing just inside the doorway. He couldn't have been more than 6. Rainwater dripped from his hair. His red polo shirt clung to his small body. His leather shoes were soaked and muddy. And even in the poor light, Jessie could tell they were expensive shoes. Everything about him said he came from money. But his face said something else. Fear. Loneliness. Exhaustion. He didn't look around. He didn't ask for food. He walked straight up to her, like she was the only safe place left in the world. Then he spoke. "Miss, can you walk me home?" Jessie's stomach tightened. Every warning she'd ever heard flashed through her mind. Stranger's child. Middle of the night. No parents. No explanation. Her first instinct was to call the police. But then she looked at his hands. They were shaking. She crouched down to his level. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" "My dad's working," he said quietly. "The driver's car broke. I got lost." Thunder rolled outside, loud enough to rattle the windows. The boy slowly reached out and touched her hand. His fingers were ice cold. That was the moment her heart made the decision her mind was still afraid to make. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's get you home." Outside, the rain came down hard, blowing sideways through the empty streets. Queens at that hour felt like a ghost town. No people. No traffic. Just neon reflections trembling in puddles. Jessie took off her thin jacket and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. She stood at the curb, waving for a taxi. 5 minutes passed. Then finally, headlights cut through the rain. Inside the cab, Jessie turned toward him. "What's your address?" He gave it calmly. The driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Upper East Side," he muttered. "That's rich people territory." Jessie felt her chest tighten. The ride took 30 minutes. The boy didn't talk. He just held her hand the entire time. Not tightly. Not desperately. Just enough to make sure she didn't disappear. When the taxi finally stopped, Jessie leaned forward to look outside. And her breath caught. A massive iron gate stood in front of them, taller than any fence she had ever seen. Security cameras blinked red from every angle. Beyond the gate stretched a long stone driveway leading to a mansion that looked like something from a movie. This wasn't just a rich home. This was wealth, power, the kind of place ordinary people never even got close to. Jessie paid the driver with the last cash in her wallet. The taxi drove away, leaving her alone in the rain with the boy. "Is this really your home?" she asked. He nodded. Then he walked up to the keypad, stood on his toes, and entered a code. The gates opened slowly. Jessie hesitated. Something about the place felt heavy. Quiet. Like she was stepping into a world she didn't belong in. But the boy was already walking forward. So she followed. They had only taken a few steps when suddenly, floodlights exploded on from every direction. Jessie raised her arm, blinded. Footsteps thundered toward them. Metal clanged. Shouts filled the air. "Don't move!" Dark figures surrounded them. Big men. Black suits. Earpieces. Guns. Before Jessie could speak, rough hands grabbed her. She was shoved to the ground, face hitting the wet stone. Her arms were twisted behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulders. "I didn't do anything," she gasped. A knee pressed into her back. "Who are you?" a man barked. "Who sent you? Why are you touching the young master?" Young master? Jessie's heart pounded. This wasn't just a rich family. This was something else. Something powerful. Something dangerous. Rain poured down as she lay there, cheek pressed to cold stone, certain she had made the worst mistake of her life. Then a small voice shouted through the chaos. "Stop!" Everything froze. The little boy stood there, soaked, shaking, but his voice was strong. "She helped me," he said. "She brought me home. Don't hurt her." The men looked at each other. The pressure on Jessie's back lifted. And then, slowly, the front doors of the mansion opened. Heavy footsteps approached. The men stepped aside instantly. Silent. Respectful. Afraid. Jessie lifted her head. A tall man walked down the steps. Perfect black suit. Cold gray eyes. The kind of presence that made the air feel heavier just by standing there. He stopped in front of the boy. "Cade," the boy whispered. The man knelt, rain soaking his expensive clothes. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head and pointed at Jessie. "She saved me, Dad." The man stood. Then he turned toward Jessie. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes studied her like she was a problem he needed to solve. Then he gave a quiet order. "Check the cameras." 2 minutes later, a guard returned, pale. "She's telling the truth, sir." Silence. The man stepped closer to Jessie. "Let her up." Hands pulled her to her feet. Her legs trembled. The man looked down at her. "Why did you help my son?" Jessie swallowed. Every instinct told her to apologize, to lower her eyes. But she didn't. She met his gaze. "Because he needed help," she said. "That's enough reason for me." For the first time, something flickered in the rich man's eyes. Surprise. He turned slightly. "Bring her inside." Jessie's heart skipped. Inside? Inside that mansion? She didn't know it yet, but walking through that door would change her life forever. And before the night was over, he was going to make her an offer worth $100,000. Jessie stepped through the massive doors with hesitation, water still dripping from her clothes onto the polished marble floor. The warmth inside the mansion hit her skin, but it didn't reach her nerves. Her heart was still racing from the moment a gun had been pointed at her. The space was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling so high it seemed impossible. Paintings covered the walls, the kind she had only ever seen in museums. Every surface shined. Every step echoed. It felt less like a home and more like a place where power lived. She suddenly became very aware of her cheap shoes, her wet uniform, and the smell of rain and kitchen grease clinging to her. The man, Cade, walked ahead without looking back. His presence alone seemed to control the entire room. People appeared and disappeared quietly, like shadows, never speaking unless spoken to. A woman with silver hair approached quickly and knelt in front of the boy. "Young master, you're freezing," she said, her voice tight with worry. "I'm okay," the boy replied softly, but he didn't let go of Jesse's hand. Cade spoke without raising his voice. "Mrs. Duca, take him upstairs. Hot bath. Dry clothes." The housekeeper nodded and reached for the boy. But he didn't move. He looked up at Jesse instead. "You're not leaving, right?" The question was quiet, but it carried something heavy inside it. Fear. The kind of fear a child feels when everyone they trust eventually disappears. Jesse forced a small smile. "I'll be right here." Only then did he release her hand. He followed Mrs. Duca upstairs, but he kept looking back until he disappeared around the corner. The moment he was gone, the silence in the room changed. Cade turned toward Jessie. "Sit." It wasn't a suggestion. She lowered herself onto a cream-colored leather sofa, careful not to soak it too much. A servant appeared with a towel and a cup of tea, then left without a word. Jessie wrapped the towel around her shoulders. Her hands were still shaking. Cade sat across from her. For a long time, he said nothing. He just watched her. Not rudely, not aggressively, but the way a man looks at something he doesn't understand. Finally, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it on the glass table and slid it toward her. "Open it." Jessie didn't touch it. "What is it?" she asked quietly. $100,000, he said. The words hung in the air. For a moment, Jessie thought she had heard wrong. "That's my thanks for bringing my son home safely." Her heart began to pound again. 100,000. That was more money than she had ever seen in her life. More than she could save in 10 years working double shifts. Enough to pay off debts. Enough to open the small bakery she had been dreaming about since she was a teenager. Cade leaned back slightly. "Everyone has a price, Miss Morgan. I just need to know what yours is." The way he said it wasn't cruel. It was calm. Matter of fact. Like a man who had solved every problem in his life by writing a number on paper. Jessie stared at the envelope. She thought about her tiny apartment in Queens. The cracked walls. The broken heater. The stack of bills on her kitchen counter. She thought about her savings account. $4,500. 5 years of work. 5 years of saying no to everything. Her fingers moved toward the envelope. Then she stopped. Something didn't feel right. Slowly, she pushed it back across the table. "I didn't help him for money." For the first time, Cade's expression changed. Not much. Just the slightest pause. "Then what do you want?" he asked. "A better job? A car? A new apartment?" Jessie stood up. "I want to go home," she said. "I have to be at work at 6 in the morning." Cade didn't respond. He just looked at her, like she was the first person in a very long time who hadn't asked him for something. Footsteps came from the stairs. The boy ran down, wearing blue pajamas, his hair still damp. He went straight to Jessie and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you leaving?" Jessie felt her chest tighten. "I have to," she said gently. "Will you come back?" The question was small, but it carried more hope than any child should have to carry for a stranger. Jessie knelt down. "I don't know, sweetheart." His face fell slightly. "I want to see you again," he whispered. She brushed his hair back. "Take care of yourself, okay?" He nodded, but he didn't let go until Cade stepped forward. "Barrett will drive you home," Cade said. Jessie stood and followed a tall man in a dark suit toward the door. As it closed behind her, she didn't look back. But upstairs, at a large window, a small figure stood watching the black car disappear into the night. During the drive home, Jessie sat quietly, staring out at the rain sliding down the glass. She kept seeing the boy's eyes, the way he held her hand, the way he asked if she would come back. She tried to shake it off. It wasn't her world. Rich people, guards, mansions. That kind of life only brought trouble. By the time the car dropped her off outside her building, she told herself it had just been a strange night. Nothing more. But 2 weeks later, things started to change. It began with a drunk customer grabbing her wrist during her shift. Before she could react, 2 men in dark suits appeared out of nowhere and escorted the man outside. He never came back. The next day, her landlord called. "Miss Morgan, your rent is being reduced by 20%. "Why?" she asked. "New building policy," he said quickly, then hung up. There was no new policy. Then she started noticing the car. A black sedan parked across the street every night when she came home from work. Same spot. Same headlights. Same silence. At first, she told herself it was a coincidence. But the car never left. Fear began to settle in her chest. She remembered the mansion, the guards, the power in Cade's voice. Maybe she had seen too much. Maybe people like him didn't leave loose ends. One night, she bought pepper spray. Another night, she started taking longer routes home, checking over her shoulder every few steps. Sleep became difficult. Every sound outside her window made her heart jump. Finally, after 2 weeks of living like this, something inside her snapped. She was tired of being afraid. The next night, when she got off work, she didn't turn toward her building. She walked straight across the street, toward the black sedan. Her heart pounded, but her steps didn't slow. She stopped beside the driver's window and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "Do whatever you're going to do. I'm tired of waiting." The door opened slowly. Jessie stepped back, gripping the pepper spray in her pocket. A man stepped out, and the moment she saw his face, her breath caught. It was the same man who had stood beside Cade that night. Barrett. He raised his hands slightly, palms open. "Miss Morgan," he said calmly, "please don't be afraid." Jessie's eyes hardened. "Then tell me why you've been following me for 2 weeks. Barrett hesitated. Then he said quietly, "Mr. Vitali gave orders to protect you." Jessie froze. "Protect me?" she repeated. Barrett nodded. "Because of the young master." Jessie's grip on the pepper spray loosened. "Every day," Barrett continued, "he asks the same question." Jessie swallowed. "What question?" Barrett looked at her for a long moment. "He asks when you're coming back." Jessie stood there in the cold night, unable to speak. Somewhere across the city, in a mansion she didn't belong to, a little boy was still waiting for her. Jessie didn't answer right away. The night felt quiet around her, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Across the street, her apartment building looked the same as always. Old brick, cracked windows, one flickering hallway light. But something inside her didn't feel the same anymore. "He asks every day?" she said finally. Barrett nodded once. "Every morning before school. Every night before bed." Jessie looked down at the pavement. "We only met once." "For him," Barrett said gently, "it wasn't just once." She didn't know what to say to that. Barrett hesitated, then continued. "You're the first person he's opened up to since his mother died." Jessie's head lifted slightly. "How long ago?" she asked. 4 years. Her chest tightened. "He was only 2, Barrett added. For a moment, Jessie couldn't breathe. 2 years old. Too young to remember a face. Too young to understand loss. Just old enough to feel the emptiness without knowing why it hurt. She thought about the way he held her hand in the taxi. Not like a child meeting someone new. Like someone who was afraid of being left again. Mr. Vitali loves his son, Barrett said. More than anything. But he doesn't know how to give him what he really needs. Jessie gave a small, tired smile. Most people think money fixes everything. Barrett looked at her carefully. The young master doesn't need money. He needs someone who makes him feel safe. Silence stretched between them. Cars passed at the end of the street. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Jessie wrapped her arms around herself. I don't belong in that world, she said quietly. Barrett didn't argue. I understand. She turned toward her building. I should go. He nodded and stepped back toward the car. But before she walked away, he said one more thing. If you ever decide to visit him, you don't need permission. Jessie didn't respond. She just went inside and closed the door behind her. That night, she didn't sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boy's face. The way his voice had softened when he asked if she would come back. The way he had stood in the rain, small and quiet, in a house too big for a child to feel safe in. By morning, she pushed the thoughts away. She had her own life. Work, bills, rent, survival. That had always been enough. 2 months later, Jessie stood inside a small empty storefront in Prospect Heights. The walls needed paint. The floors were worn. The space was barely big enough for 5 tables and a counter. But to her, it was everything. She had taken all her savings. Every dollar. She had borrowed money from her aunt, too. It was risky. Maybe even foolish. But it was her dream. A bakery. A place filled with warmth instead of neon lights. The smell of sugar instead of grease. A place where people came for comfort, not just food. She had named it Sugar and Spice. The first few weeks were hard. She woke at 4 every morning to bake. Worked the counter all day. Cleaned at night. Counted every dollar twice. Business was slow. But little by little, customers started coming back. Office workers for coffee. Parents with kids. Couples sharing pastries by the window. For the first time in her life, Jessie felt like she was building something that belonged to her. That afternoon, around 3, the shop was quiet. She was wiping the counter when a long black limousine pulled up outside. Her hand froze. The door opened. A small figure stepped out. Navy school uniform. Backpack. Hair neatly combed. But those eyes. She knew those eyes. The door burst open. Miss Jessie. He ran straight to her. Before she could even react, he threw his arms around her waist and held on like he was afraid she might disappear. Jessie stood there for a second, stunned. Then slowly, she wrapped her arms around him. Asher, what are you doing here? He pulled back, smiling so wide it almost hurt to look at. I found you. How? She asked. I asked Dad every day, he said proudly. He said you were busy. But I wanted to see you. Jessie guided him to a table near the window. Did you come alone? He pointed outside. The limousine was still there. Barrett stood beside it, watching quietly. Jessie brought him a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk. He ate like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Do you like it here? She asked. He nodded with his mouth full. It smells happy. The words hit her harder than she expected. After a moment, he looked up at her. Why didn't you come back? Jessie hesitated. I didn't think you needed me. Asher shook his head. I did. He lowered his voice. At school, nobody talks to me. Why not? Their parents tell them not to, he said simply. They're scared of my dad. Jessie felt something twist inside her. "And at home?" she asked. He shrugged. "It's quiet." After a long pause, he said softly, "I like it here. It feels normal." Jessie sat down across from him. For the next hour, he talked. About school. About books. About how boring the mansion felt. About how he liked the smell of baking and the sound of people laughing. Before he left, he hugged her again. "Can I come tomorrow?" Jessie hesitated. Then she nodded. "Yes, you can come tomorrow." His face lit up. When he ran outside, Barrett opened the car door for him. Before getting in, the boy turned back and waved. Jessie stood at the window long after the limousine drove away. The next week, he came back twice. Then 3 times. Each visit, he stayed a little longer. Each visit, he smiled a little more. He helped her mix dough, standing on a stool. He laughed when flour got on his hands. He told her stories about school and asked her to tell him fairy tales while cookies baked. And every time he left, he asked the same question. "Can I come again?" One afternoon, Jessie was closing early when a different car pulled up. Not the limousine. A sleek black sports car. The door opened. Cade stepped out. No guards. No Barrett. Just him. He walked inside slowly, his eyes scanning the small shop. The worn tables. The simple decorations. The narrow space filled with the smell of sugar and bread. Jessie felt the air change. The 2 customers inside noticed it too. They finished quickly and left without being asked. Cade sat at the table by the window. The same one Asher always chose. Jessie walked over and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "You've changed, my son." Jessie shook her head. "I didn't do anything." "That's the problem," he replied. "You did what I couldn't." There was something different in his voice. Not power. Not control. Something heavier. Something closer to regret. After a moment, he reached into his pocket and placed a card on the table. "I want you to work for us," he said. $8,000 a month. Spend time with him. Teach him. Be there. Jessie stared at the card. Then she pushed it back. "I don't want to be part of your world." Cade didn't look surprised. "You became part of it the night you took his hand." Silence settled between them. "Think about it," he said, standing up. Then he walked out. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. Asher rushed in, breathless. "Miss Jessie, did Dad come?" Jessie nodded. "What did he say?" he asked, eyes wide with worry. She looked at him, at the hope, at the fear. And for the first time, she realized something. If she walked away now, it wouldn't just be a job she was refusing. It would be him. That night, lying in her small apartment, Jessie stared at the business card in her hand. And slowly, she reached for her phone. Jessie held the business card between her fingers for a long time before dialing. Her small apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside and the ticking of the cheap wall clock above her kitchen sink. The place smelled faintly of flour and sugar from the early morning baking she did every day. It was simple, small, safe. His world was none of those things. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She thought about the guards, the power, the danger that seemed to follow his name. Then she saw Asher's face in her mind. The way he stood on the stool, covered in flour, laughing like a normal kid. The way his voice softened every time he said, "Can I come again?" She pressed the button. The line rang once. Then his voice came through. "Miss Morgan." He didn't sound surprised, as if he had been expecting the call. Jessie took a slow breath. "I'll do it," she said. "But I have conditions." There was a short pause. I'm listening. I keep the bakery, she said firmly. That comes first. I come to the house 3 afternoons a week. And I'm not your employee. I'm there for Asher. Not for your money. Not for your business. Silence stretched across the line. For a moment, she wondered if she had pushed too far. Then he spoke. Fine. Just one word. But it carried something unexpected. Respect. 6 months passed faster than Jessie expected. 3 afternoons a week, she walked through the iron gates that no longer made her heart race the way they once had. The guards nodded to her now. The staff spoke to her by name. Inside the mansion, things slowly changed. Asher changed first. The quiet boy who had once spoken in short sentences began to talk more. He laughed easily now. He asked questions. He told stories about school. He even started bringing homework to show her, proud of every good grade. They built routines. Homework at the kitchen table. Baking lessons every Friday. Story time before bed, even though he was getting older and pretended he didn't need it. Sometimes he still asked her to stay until he fell asleep. And every time she left, he hugged her tight. See you tomorrow, right? Mrs. Duca watched all of this quietly at first. She had been cautious, protective, always standing close to the boy as if the world might take him away at any moment. But after a few weeks, she began bringing Jessie tea when she arrived. After a month, she set an extra plate at dinner. One evening, while Asher ran upstairs to grab a book, the older woman touched Jessie's arm gently. "You've brought him back," she said softly. "We hadn't seen him smile like this since his mother." Jessie didn't know what to say to that. But the words stayed with her. Cade changed too, though in quieter ways. At first, he kept his distance. He was polite, formal, always watching, always observing. But Jessie began to notice small things. On the days she came, he got home earlier. Sometimes he sat at the dining table while she helped Asher with homework, reading through files but listening to their conversations. Sometimes he stayed when she told bedtime stories, standing quietly near the door. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his expression softened when he watched his son laugh. One night, Jessie was about to leave when Mrs. Duca stopped her. "The young master has a fever," she said, worry tight in her voice. "He keeps asking for you." Jessie didn't even remember how fast she drove back. When she entered his room, Asher was burning with heat, his face flushed, his small hands restless against the blankets. "Miss Jessie," he whispered weakly when he saw her. She sat beside him immediately and took his hand. "I'm here." Through the night, she stayed, changing cold cloths on his forehead, giving him water, whispering stories when he became restless. At one point, half asleep from the fever, he clutched her sleeve. "Mom, don't go." The word hit her like a quiet shock. She didn't correct him. She just smoothed his hair and kept her hand in his. By the time the fever finally broke near dawn, Jessie was exhausted. She leaned forward in the chair beside his bed, her head resting near his arm. And without realizing it, she fell asleep. When Cade came home a little after 3 in the morning, the house was silent. He went straight to his son's room, and stopped in the doorway. The lamp cast a soft glow across the bed. Asher slept peacefully, his breathing steady. Beside him, Jessie sat in the chair, her head resting against the mattress, her hand still wrapped around his. She hadn't moved. She hadn't let go. For a long moment, Cade didn't step inside. He just stood there, watching. Then quietly, he walked in, took a blanket from the sofa, and draped it gently over her shoulders. He sat down across the room, and stayed there until morning. When Jessie woke, the first thing she saw was him sitting opposite her. His jacket was off. His sleeves rolled slightly. His eyes tired. "You were here all night," she said softly. So were you. She looked at Asher. His fever was gone. His color had returned. Relief washed through her chest. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Cade said quietly, "You're like her." Jesse looked up. "Who?" "My wife." His voice stayed calm, but something inside it felt fragile. "She loved him the same way." Jesse hesitated. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know." "Cancer," he said simply. "We found out too late." The word hung between them. Jesse's throat tightened. "My mother died the same way," she said. For the first time, their eyes held each other not as strangers from different worlds, but as two people who had lost something they could never replace. After that night, something shifted between them. The distance didn't disappear, but the silence between them became easier, warmer. A few weeks later, the shift came from somewhere else. That evening, Jessie was closing the bakery when she stepped into the alley to take out the trash. Two men were waiting. Dark suits. Hard faces. They stepped forward slowly. "Jessie Morgan," one of them said. Her heart started pounding. "Yes. Stay away from Cade Vitali." The words were calm, but the threat behind them was clear. "You're in the wrong world," the other man added. "This is your only warning." They turned and walked away before she could respond. Jessie stood there for a long time, the trash bag still in her hand. Her fingers were shaking. That night, she told herself it was nothing. Just intimidation. Just people trying to scare her. She didn't tell Cade. She didn't tell Barrett. She didn't want to be seen as weak. But a week later, the bell above the bakery door rang just before closing. The same two men walked inside. And this time, they locked the door behind them. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. Jessie stood behind the counter, her hands resting on the wood, her heart already beginning to race. The bakery was empty. The evening light outside had faded, and the warm smell of fresh bread suddenly felt thin and fragile against the tension in the room. The two men walked toward her slowly. No rush. No anger. Just quiet confidence. "You didn't listen," the taller one said. Jessie kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." The second man flipped the sign on the door from open to closed. "This time," he said, "there's no warning." Jessie's back touched the wall behind the counter. There was nowhere to go. Nothing to grab except a metal tray and a coffee pot. Her hands were shaking. For a moment, fear rose up inside her, sharp and cold. Then something else replaced it. Anger. She had been afraid her whole life. Afraid when her mother got sick. Afraid when the hospital bills came. Afraid when her father disappeared into debt and shame. Afraid when she was alone at 16, trying to survive in a world that didn't care whether she ate or slept or lived. Fear had followed her for years. She was tired of it. Jessie straightened her shoulders. "You think I scare easy?" she said quietly. The men paused. Her voice didn't sound strong. But it didn't sound weak either. "I lost my mom when I was 14, she continued. "My father went to prison 2 years later. I worked every job I could find just to keep a roof over my head. I built this place with money I saved $1 at a time." She stepped out from behind the counter. The taller man actually shifted his weight back. "I didn't come from money," Jessie said. "I didn't grow up protected. I survived because I learned one thing." She met their eyes. "I don't run." Silence filled the bakery. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the shorter one spoke quietly. "You're brave." "Or stupid," the other added. Jessie didn't respond. The taller man gave a small nod. "We'll let our boss decide which one." They turned and walked out. The bell above the door rang softly behind them. The lock clicked open, and just like that, they were gone. Jessie stood still for several seconds. Then her knees gave out. She sank down onto the floor behind the counter, her whole body shaking now that the danger had passed. Her hands covered her face. But she didn't cry. She had learned a long time ago that fear didn't change anything. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching. Across the street, inside a parked car, Barrett lowered his phone. The small camera inside the bakery had captured everything. 2 hours later, Cade Vitali watched the video. And when it ended, his expression didn't show anger. It showed something colder. The kind of cold that comes before a storm. That night, long after closing, Jessie sat alone in the dark bakery. She hadn't turned on the lights. The street outside was quiet. She was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene. The door opened suddenly. Hard. Jessie jumped to her feet. Cade stood in the doorway. His eyes were sharp, his face tight with controlled fury. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but the anger inside it filled the room. Jessie straightened. "Because I can handle myself. They threatened you. They didn't touch me. They will next time." She crossed her arms. "I'm not your responsibility." Cade took a step closer. "You don't understand what you're involved in." "I understand enough," she shot back. "This is your world, not mine." His hand slammed down on the table beside her. The sound made the glass display rattle. "You became part of my world the night you took my son home." The words hung between them. Jessie opened her mouth to argue. But he spoke again, quieter now. "You belong to Asher." The anger drained from her chest, because that part was true. Cade turned away, running a hand through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower. Unsteady. "I already lost my wife," he said. "I'm not losing anyone else." Jessie froze. He didn't turn around. "She didn't tell me she was sick," he continued. "She hid it. Said she didn't want me to worry. By the time I found out, it was too late." The silence that followed felt heavy. Not dangerous. Not angry. Just heavy with things that couldn't be fixed. Jessie stepped closer. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Cade turned back to her. For the first time, she didn't see the powerful man everyone feared. She saw someone tired. Someone who had already lost more than he could afford to lose. "From now on," he said, his voice steady again, "if anything happens, you tell me." Jessie nodded. "I will." 2 weeks later, the 2 men who had threatened her were gone. No more warnings. No more shadows outside the bakery. But something else changed. Barrett and 2 security men began following her. Not close enough to interfere, but close enough that she knew they were there. At first, it made her uncomfortable. Then slowly, she stopped noticing. Life settled into a routine again. Morning baking. Afternoon at the mansion. Evenings closing the shop. But something quiet began to grow between her and Cade. Nothing dramatic. Just small moments. The way he lingered a little longer when she was leaving. The way their hands sometimes brushed when they were both helping Asher with something. The way the silence between them no longer felt tense. One evening, after putting Asher to bed, Jessie didn't leave right away. She stepped outside into the garden behind the house. The night was clear. Cool. The city lights glowed faintly beyond the trees. She sat on a stone bench near the fountain and tilted her face toward the sky. For once, everything felt calm. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. Cade sat down beside her. Not too close, but not far either. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "You're not leaving tonight? I'm waiting for a taxi. I can drive you." She shook her head. The silence returned. Then he spoke again. "I don't know how to do this." She looked at him. "Do what?" He stared ahead, his voice low. "Care about someone again." Jessie felt something shift inside her. "I stopped after Catherine," he said. "I thought if I didn't let anyone close, I wouldn't have to lose anyone." Jessie understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. "I did the same thing," she said softly. "After my mom died." He turned to her. "But you care about Asher." "He's a child," she said. "Children don't know how to betray you." Silence. Then he asked quietly, "What about me?" Jessie didn't answer right away. She looked at him. Really looked. Not the powerful man. Not the wealthy man. Just a father. A widower. Someone who was still afraid of losing what little he had left. "I want to trust you," she said finally. His hand lifted slowly, carefully, like he was afraid she might pull away. His fingers touched her cheek. Jessie didn't move. Instead, she leaned slightly into his hand, and closed her eyes. For a moment, the world felt very still. Then he leaned closer, and their lips met. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was gentle, careful, like two people who had forgotten what it felt like to let someone close. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. They sat together in the quiet garden, his arm resting around her shoulders. Inside the house, everything was still. But upstairs, in the hallway outside his bedroom, a small figure stood in the shadows, watching them. Asher stood very still in the dim hallway, his small fingers curled around the edge of the wall. He had come out to get a glass of water. But when he looked down through the tall window that faced the garden, he saw them. His father sitting close to Jessie. Jessie leaning into him. The two of them together in a way he had never seen before. For a long moment, the boy didn't move. His heart beat faster, but not from fear. From something he didn't fully understand. Hope. Carefully, he stepped back into the shadows so they wouldn't see him. Then he turned and walked quietly back to his room. He didn't ask questions that night. But when Jessie came the next afternoon, something about him felt lighter. He ran to the door the moment she arrived. "Miss Jessie." He hugged her tighter than usual. And when she helped him with homework later, he kept looking up at her, like he was checking to make sure she was still there. That evening, while they were baking cookies in the kitchen, flour dusted across the counter and the smell of chocolate filling the air, Asher spoke without looking at her. "You're not going to leave, right?" Jessie paused, her hands still in the bowl. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged, still focused on the dough. "People always leave." The words were quiet, simple, but they carried 4 years of loss inside them. Jessie knelt beside him so they were at eye level. "I'm not going anywhere," she said gently. He studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded once and went back to shaping the dough. But that night, when she stood to leave, he held her hand a little longer than usual. And from the doorway, Cade watched them. The weeks that followed brought a quiet change inside the house. Jessie was there more often now. Not officially living there, not yet. But the space she occupied had grown beyond the 3 afternoons she originally agreed to. Sometimes she stayed for dinner. Sometimes she stayed until Asher fell asleep. Sometimes she stayed late, talking with Cade in the living room while the house settled into its quiet night rhythm. The staff no longer treated her like a visitor. Mrs. Duca had begun setting her place at the table without asking. One evening, after clearing the dishes, the older woman stopped beside her. "He calls you Mom when you're not here," she said softly. Jessie froze. Mrs. Duca gave her a gentle smile. "He doesn't even realize he does it." That night, Jessie couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the word Mom. She had never expected to hear it again. Not after her own mother was gone. Not after years of building walls around herself, convincing herself she didn't need anyone. And now, somehow, a little boy had found a place for her in his life. The next morning, she went back to the bakery before sunrise. The familiar routine grounded her. Flour, dough, heat from the ovens. The simple rhythm of work. This was her world. Honest. Earned. Safe. But even here, things were changing. Customers had begun to recognize her. Some came just to talk. Some brought their children, who laughed and pressed their faces against the display case. For the first time in years, her life didn't feel like survival. It felt like something growing. That afternoon, the doorbell chimed as she was restocking the counter. She looked up, expecting a customer. Instead, she saw Cade. He stepped inside, dressed in a simple coat instead of his usual sharp suit. For a moment, he just stood there, looking around the bakery. The worn wooden tables. The handwritten menu. The warm light and the smell of fresh bread. "This place suits you," he said. Jessie wiped her hands on her apron. "It's the only thing that's really mine." He walked slowly to the counter. "I've been thinking," he said. Jessie leaned against the glass case. "That sounds dangerous." A faint hint of a smile touched his face. "Move in." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Jessie didn't answer right away. "This isn't about convenience," he continued. "Asher asks about you every morning. Every night. And," he hesitated slightly, "I don't like seeing you go back to that apartment alone." Jessie folded her arms. "And what happens when your world catches up with me again?" Cade's expression turned serious. "I won't let anything happen to you." She met his eyes. "You couldn't promise that before." He didn't argue. Because they both knew it was true. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he said quietly, "I'm not asking you to join my world." He looked around the bakery again. "I'm asking you to bring yours into ours." Jessie looked down at the counter, her fingers tracing the edge of the wood. Her life had always been built on one rule. Don't depend on anyone. But now there was a boy who waited for her every day, and a man who looked at her like she mattered. "I need time," she said. Cade nodded. "I'll wait." He turned and left. That evening, when she arrived at the mansion, Asher ran straight into her arms. "Miss Jessie, guess what?" "What?" "I told Mrs. Duca you should live here." Jessie blinked. "You did?" He nodded proudly. "Because families live together." The words were said so simply, so naturally. Jessie felt her chest tighten. Later that night, after Asher was asleep, she found herself standing in the hallway outside his room. The door was slightly open. Inside, he slept peacefully, one arm wrapped around the stuffed bear he'd had since he was small. For a long moment, she just watched him. Then she turned, and found Cade standing behind her. Neither of them spoke right away. Finally, he said quietly, "He hasn't slept this peacefully in years." Jessie swallowed. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" She looked at him. "Of becoming something he can't afford to lose." Cade's expression softened. "He already chose you," he said. The words stayed with her. That night, Jessie went back to her apartment and began packing a small suitcase. Not everything. Just enough for a few days. Just to try. The next evening, she arrived at the mansion with the suitcase in her hand. Asher opened the door. He looked down at the bag, then up at her. "Are you staying?" Jesse nodded. His face lit up. He threw his arms around her and held on tight. From across the room, Cade watched them. But outside the gates, parked across the street in the shadows, a car engine started. And inside it, a man lifted a phone to his ear. "She's living there now," he said quietly. A long pause. Then a cold voice answered. "Good." The line went dead. The first few days felt unreal. Jessie woke up in a room bigger than her entire apartment, sunlight pouring through tall windows, soft carpets under her feet instead of cold tile. The quiet inside the house was different from the silence she was used to. It wasn't lonely. It felt protected. But she kept her routine. Every morning, she still left before sunrise to open the bakery. Flour on her hands, hair tied back, apron dusted white. That part of her life didn't change. And every evening, she came back to the mansion. To Asher waiting at the door. The first night she stayed, he knocked on her room twice before bedtime. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He stepped inside slowly, holding his stuffed bear like he had something important to say. "Are you really staying?" he asked. "For a while," she said gently. His shoulders relaxed. Then he walked over and hugged her, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. "I don't want you to go back to the old place," he whispered. Jessie closed her eyes for a moment and held him. "I'm right here." That night, he slept without waking once. Mrs. Duca noticed. So did Cade. Life began to settle into a new rhythm. Breakfast together when schedules allowed. Homework at the kitchen table. Evenings filled with small conversations, quiet laughter, the normal moments that money could never buy. But the change that affected Jessie the most came one afternoon. She had just come back from the bakery and was putting away her bag when she heard a voice from the living room. "Mom?" She froze. For a second, she thought she had imagined it. Then Asher appeared at the doorway, looking just as surprised as she felt. He hadn't meant to say it. The word had slipped out. His eyes widened. "I mean, Miss Jessie." Jessie walked toward him slowly. "Say it again," she said softly. He hesitated. Then, very quietly, "Mom." The word landed gently, but it hit her heart with a force she wasn't ready for. Her throat tightened. She knelt and pulled him into her arms. "You can call me that," she whispered. Behind them, in the hallway, Cade stood still. He didn't interrupt, but his eyes stayed on them for a long time. That night, after Asher fell asleep, Jessie found Cade in his office. He was standing by the window, city lights reflecting faintly in the glass. "He called me Mom today," she said. Cade nodded. "I know." She studied him. "You're not upset?" He turned toward her. "No." There was a pause. "He hasn't called anyone that since Catherine." The name hung quietly between them. Jessie stepped closer. "I don't want to replace her." "You're not replacing her," Cade said. "You're giving him something he's been missing." His voice softened. "You're giving both of us something we didn't think we'd have again." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he reached for her hand. Not urgently, not possessively, just gently. And this time, Jessie didn't hesitate. Weeks passed. Asher's grades improved. His teachers reported he was more social, more confident. He talked about the bakery to anyone who would listen, proudly telling them his mom made the best cookies in New York. At the bakery, business was growing too. Regular customers now knew her by name. Parents brought their kids after school. Office workers stopped by every morning. Her two worlds were different. One built with money and power. the other built with hard work and small victories. But somehow, Jessie was learning how to live in both. Then one evening, as she was closing up, Barrett approached her outside. His expression was serious. "Miss Morgan, there's something you should know." Her stomach tightened. "What is it?" "There's been movement," he said. "People watching the bakery. Different cars. Different faces." Jessie felt the air leave her lungs. "The same people?" she asked quietly. Barrett nodded. "They haven't approached again. But they're paying attention." She looked back at the bakery. Her dream. Her work. The place she had built from nothing. "I don't want this following me there," she said. "It already has," Barrett replied. That night, she told Cade. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing colder with each word. "I should close the shop," Jessie said finally. "No." The answer came immediately. "They want you afraid," he continued. "They want you to shrink your world." He stepped closer. "I won't let them take anything else from you." Jessie searched his face. "But this is because of you." Cade didn't deny it. "Yes." The honesty surprised her. Silence filled the room. Then he said quietly, "I never promised you a safe life. Only that I would stand between you and anything that tried to hurt you." Jessie nodded slowly. She understood what she had stepped into. Love didn't come without risk. Family didn't come without sacrifice. The next few days, security around both the mansion and the bakery increased. Barrett's team rotated shifts. Unmarked cars stayed nearby. Cameras were installed outside the shop. Customers didn't notice. But Jessie did. And every night, she found herself checking the street before locking the door. One evening, as she turned the sign to closed, she noticed a car parked across the street. Engine running. Lights off. She stood there for a moment, keys in her hand. Then the car slowly drove away. Her heart didn't settle until she was back inside the mansion. Later that night, she sat beside Asher's bed as he finished a book. "Mom?" "Yes." "If something bad happens, you won't leave, right?" The question hit deeper than he knew. Jessie smoothed his hair. "Nothing is going to happen." "But if it does?" She forced a small smile. "I'm not going anywhere." He seemed satisfied with that. After he fell asleep, she stayed there a little longer, watching his steady breathing. Then she stepped into the hallway. Cade was waiting there. "You're worried," he said. "Yes." He nodded once. "They're testing us." "Testing what?" "How much you mean to me." Jessie felt a chill. "What does that mean?" Cade's eyes hardened slightly. "It means they think you're my weakness." The words hung between them. Then he added quietly, "And they're right." Silence filled the hallway. Somewhere in the distance, a phone began to ring. Barrett's voice echoed faintly from downstairs. "Urgent." Cade's expression changed. He turned toward the stairs. But before he left, he looked back at Jessie. "Stay with Asher tonight." She nodded. As his footsteps disappeared down the hallway, Jessie felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear. Not exactly. It felt like the calm that comes right before a storm. And downstairs, Barrett was already saying the words no one wanted to hear. They made their move. Cade didn't take his eyes off the screen. The man in the footage stood there for a long second, hands in his coat pockets, looking straight into the camera like he wanted to be recognized. Then he turned and walked back to his car. Barrett paused the video. "You know him," he said quietly. Cade nodded once. "Yes." Jessie felt the tension in the room shift. This wasn't fear anymore. This was something older. Something personal. "Who is he?" she asked. Cade's voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. Daniel Mercer. He used to work for me. Years ago. Barrett added, he lost everything when the business split. He blamed Cade for it. Jesse looked back at the frozen image. So this is revenge. Yes, Cade said. And now he thinks you and Asher are the easiest way to hurt me. Silence filled the room. Then Jesse spoke. This ends now. Cade turned to her. How? She met his eyes. You stop running from him. You talk to him. Barrett frowned slightly. He won't listen. Jessie shook her head. People who want revenge aren't always looking for a fight. Sometimes they just want to be heard. Cade studied her for a long moment. You're asking me to trust a man who wants to destroy my family. I'm asking you to protect your family without destroying someone else's, she said quietly. The room fell still. Because deep down, Cade understood what she meant. War would protect them for now. But it would also teach Asher that violence was the only answer. And that was a lesson he refused to pass on. 2 days later, the meeting was arranged. Neutral ground. Daylight. Barrett and his team stayed nearby, out of sight but ready. Jessie insisted on coming. This started because of me, she said. I'm part of how it ends. The meeting took place in a small office above one of Cade's older properties. Daniel Mercer was already there when they arrived. He looked older than the man in the video. Tired. Worn down by years of anger that hadn't given him the peace he expected. The moment he saw Jessie, he smiled faintly. So this is the weakness. Jessie stepped forward. No, she said. I'm the reason this ends today. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. Cade remained silent behind her. Jessie spoke calmly. I know you lost your business. I know your life changed because of decisions that were made back then. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't know anything. I know what it's like to lose everything, she said gently. My mother died when I was 14. My father went to prison. I built my life from nothing. I understand what anger feels like when the world takes something you love. The room went quiet. Daniel didn't speak. So let me ask you something, she continued. If you hurt him, if you hurt us, does that give you your life back? No answer. Or does it just give you one more thing to carry? Daniel's eyes dropped for the first time. You think I'm a monster, he said quietly. No, Jessie replied. I think you're a man who's been living in pain for too long. Cade stepped forward then. I should have handled things differently back then, he said. I protected my business. But I didn't protect the people who depended on it. Daniel looked at him. For the first time, there was no hatred in his expression. Just exhaustion. What do you want from me? He asked. Peace, Cade said. And a chance to make it right. Silence stretched across the room. Then Daniel laughed once, tired and low. You know what's funny? I thought revenge would make me feel stronger. He looked at Jessie. But you're right. It just made me tired. Barrett watched carefully as Daniel reached into his coat. Everyone tensed. But he only pulled out a small envelope and placed it on the table. Photos. Surveillance. Plans. All of it, he said. I'm done. The tension in the room finally eased. Outside, the air felt different when they stepped out. Lighter. For the first time in weeks, Jessie could breathe without feeling the weight of something coming. That night, the house felt calm again. Asher ran through the hallway after dinner, laughing, his voice echoing in a way it hadn't for days. Later, Jessie tucked him into bed. Everything's okay now? He asked. Yes, she said softly. He looked at her for a moment. Because you stayed. Jesse smiled and kissed his forehead. I'm always staying. After he fell asleep, she stepped into the hallway. Cade was waiting there. It's over, he said quietly. She nodded. For a moment, they just stood there, the silence between them no longer heavy. Then he took her hand. You didn't win this with power, he said. You won it with kindness. Jessie shook her head gently. No. We won it because we chose family over pride. Months passed. The bakery window was repaired. Business grew stronger than ever. Customers filled the small space every morning, the smell of fresh bread and coffee warming the air. At the mansion, life found its rhythm again. Homework at the table. Movie nights on weekends. Laughter echoing through rooms that once felt too quiet. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Asher sat between Jesse and Cade on the couch. "Can I ask something?" he said. "Of course," Jesse replied. He looked at both of them. "Why did everything change that night?" "The night you met." Jesse and Cade exchanged a glance. Then Jesse answered. "Because sometimes," she said gently, "one small act of kindness can change an entire life." Asher leaned against her shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't say no." Jessie wrapped her arm around him. And in that quiet moment, she realized something. She had once believed she was the one who rescued a lost little boy in the rain. But the truth was, that night, they didn't find her weakness, they found her family. And family, built on love instead of fear, was stronger than any amount of money, power, or pride. Years later, whenever rain began to fall, Jessie would pause for a moment and remember. Because sometimes, the life you're meant to live begins with a single choice to help someone, when you have every reason to walk away. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe, and tell us in the comments which region you're watching from.